Welcome to the RideShare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
All right. So Dennis Cinelli joined Uber in 2016 and is the head of US&C Mobility at Uber. He's focused on reimagining personal mobility and creating the best platform for flexible work. Prior to taking on his current role, Dennis was the head of strategic finance at Uber, helping to take the company public in 2019. He also led Jump, Uber's micromobility business. And Dennis and his wife, Colleen, live in the Bay Area with their 2 sons, George and Henry, who just happen to have the same name as my boys too. So it's got to be a good omen, right, Dennis?
I think so. It's a good start.
Definitely. So first, what does USNC stand for? United
States and Canada.
Something? Okay. All right. I think I'm always trying to guess the acronyms. But so you've been at Uber for a while. Tell me a little bit. Let's start off. Tell me a little bit about what you're up to yourself, and your team at Uber. What do you guys work on sort of a day-to-day basis, and what are your goals?
Yeah, so I lead Uber's US and Canada rides business or mobility business. And that's everything you see in the rider app and the driver app. And the way I think about it is, 2 big goals: reimagining personal mobility. How do we make moving around cities more efficient, cheaper, faster, more sustainable? And then how do we create really good flexible work? And that's what you focus on a lot. The things that we're focused on, recently is, one is recovery. Recovery is kind of a big word for us. We've been in COVID and try to make sure we recover the business, both for riders and drivers. The next one is, just growth. I kind of tell my team, we want to retire the word recovery in 2022. And want to get back to talking about regrowing the business. And that's, and so you've seen us launch new products and services around that. And I think, you'll continue to see us extend our platform beyond just UberX and Uber Black, but into things like, we have Reserve, we have Line, micromobility on our platform. We're really, doing some new things with rentals and car on demand. And then the last area is sustainability. We've made a big bet in terms of electrification. You saw the Hertz and Tesla deal, which I'm really excited about. And so those 3 big areas, like recovery and growing the business and making it more sustainable, are big areas for us.
Got it. Well, you sound like a good guy to talk to, because those are actually 3 areas that I care a lot about. And now I didn't realize that those are all under your purview, but good to know. And I want to start off on this concept of recovery. I think it's interesting that you told your team, 2022, we want to really look towards growth. I mean, what's one thing that kind of differs from rider to driver recovery? I guess, and kind of how I've looked at it is, obviously from the driver's perspective, but I think one thing I always noted during COVID was that, for riders, it's actually really quite easy when they do want to take an Uber ride again. They literally just open the app and call for a ride, right? On the driver's side, there could be, documents that have expired. They may not want to do it anymore. It seems like a lot more complex when it comes to recovery on the driver's side. So what have you sort of seen rider versus driver when it comes to recovery at Uber?
I think it's just rider use cases, right? People thinking about when they want to use Uber and what for. And we have this one really big, our biggest product is UberX, but like when you actually think about what UberX does for people, right? It takes them to the airport, it takes them for errands, for commute, for nights out. And so when you start to break that down, you say, like, well, what are they trying to do and go do now in sort of this COVID world? And that's what's been really interesting to look at. We study by market the use cases, where riders are coming back and what they're doing. And obviously we spend a lot of time on thinking about like where drivers are and how our drivers coming back. That's how we think about for riders. And, and we can get into it, but what you see is there's kind of like 3 big themes. Like there's a geography theme of like which cities are more recovered or have more movement than others. There's kind of this just like within cities theme, like what use cases, what are people doing within cities? And I also think the type of users has changed, right? I mean, if you think about one of the things we're seeing is, throughout the pandemic, we're seeing, essential workers having to move more, trips to and from big box stores, hospitals, warehouses, moving more trips outside the core. There's still more movement versus, outside the downtown versus in downtowns. And so you get a bunch of like different trends going on when you think about like rider movement.
Yeah, it's sort of starting to make my head hurt because you mentioned, that it differs by geography, and then there's these trends within cities. I mean, if we start at some of the high level, more obvious ones, I'm curious, not that I'm going to ask you if this is true or false, but sort of just if you feel that the narrative is correct, behind the fact, for example, that, now, I know that airport travel before the pandemic used to be a big component of Uber's business. And also, because those rides, those passengers were, someone else was paying for it, right? So maybe less price sensitive and, more willing to go Uber Black or pay more surge or whatever it might be. Now everyone says, oh, we're traveling less for work, or I'm doing less meetings. Have you guys sort of seen that bear out? And if so, what are you kind of planning on to make up for that in the future?
Yeah, so maybe take a step back. On overall trends, we've definitely seen like geography wise, like what you kind of hear and people see. You get this like New York and the South, Miami, Texas, recovering a bit faster than the West. Yeah, in terms of Uber mobility, right? And you've seen that play out. Like I think New York is a place, New York is a place that actually is leading in recovery in some respects for us.
Got it.
So that's pretty interesting. And then you go under that and you go, okay, like, well, what types of trips? And to your point, and what you're finding is social has come back a lot. Friday nights, Saturday nights, faster than other trips. Airport has come back strong, but it's more leisure. Yeah. Right. To your point, like you're not seeing as many business travelers, though we are seeing that. I think we saw that pick up a lot faster in the latter half of last year. And then what's interesting to me is like you start to see like different trends emerge, like people using Uber more in the middle of the day to run errands than they used to, like just like this whole notion of flexible work. Yeah. Is like changing patterns a bit. Whereas, in Uber, we used to have like these really strong commute patterns in the downtown cores, right? Morning and afternoon rush. Like you're starting to see some of those patterns shift. And I think that's going to be interesting, like what happens in the future as like, in general, people are more remote, more flexible work. Like how does that change patterns? And then like the cool part for Uber is you'll see it. We'll see it live, like in our Uber trip flow.
Are there any macro trends that you and your team sort of look to as maybe a leading indicator of, hey, this new sector is going to emerge, we need to plan for it? Or, is there anything that you sort of look to outside of your own data?
Outside of I think the one thing that I'm very curious about, and it's a slight shift, which is like just this shift from a little bit more we call non-core, like less downtown traffic, more out in the suburbs, more outside city centers. And it's slight, but at our volume, that slight is a big number of trip shift. And that to me is going to be an interesting one, like to see play out. And it's hard to tell because we haven't really seen a lot of big employers that have gone remote come back to offices. But I think that one's going to be really interesting, which is like, what does that mean for just sort of the future of work in general? Like, where are people working? How are they working? But then if you're an Uber driver, who you sort of built your notion of patterns and trip flows of like where you want to go, what does that mean around the value of like taking that trip outside the core? Right. Versus it used to be, I think a little bit more of you used to be able to focus downtown more, but like what happens if some of these non-urban cores become a little busy? And for me, like the fact that we get a product like Reserve, where we can start to schedule rides in those more remote, less dense areas, I think that becomes a way that we're addressing that, which is, okay, it used to be really hard to do like Uber on demand. It's harder to do Uber completely on demand in these sparser areas. Right. But you get a product like Reserve where like, okay, now riders and drivers can match ahead of time. And that's going to be like an interesting phenomenon, as if that shift outside the urban core stays or even grows after people return. return to office if that actually happens.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good example because I mean, I think that obviously we study it a lot from the driver's side and it's sort of, when are the busiest times and where are the busiest places? And it's sort of, often it's like, go downtown, right? Like the more urban area, I guess the more suburban areas, excuse me, are, less busy, more spread out, right? So you might have to drive further to your passenger. And then if they're going a short distance, not that lucrative, right? So I think that that's kind of interesting. Drivers kind of figure this out. Okay, morning, afternoon rush hour, Sundays, early AM, airport rides, Friday, Saturday night, the party hours, as drivers call it. So they sort of figure out, when the busy times and places are. I'm curious, though, one thing that I've always felt, it seems like a pretty big challenge and kind of that a lot of manual input needs to go into balancing the marketplace, right? If these changes are happening, I mean, I guess I'm curious how you guys at Uber react to that, right? Because obviously you've got, a million or two drivers out there, some doing part-time, some doing full-time, some like me driving very sporadically. I'm probably a very bad, unreliable driver, for example, right? But I mean, is there a lot of manual kind of input? And if so, what goes into kind of keeping that marketplace balance? Because you're talking about all these changes, and at the other end of these rider changes need to be drivers ready and, to fulfill those rides in sort of a quick and efficient manner, right?
Yeah. I mean, the good news for us is, having built a marketplace that is tech driven, there's a lot of stuff that happens in real time or near real time, with the technology. I mean, I just think about Surge, right? Like Surge is the ultimate sort of real-time tool, automated real-time responding. And so, that will respond. And then even some of our incentive technologies, as we think through, like, where do you put a streak bonus, that will shift, based on the tech. So there's a lot of tech that gives us leverage here, right? Because you can't manually manage all these marketplaces. But my team spends a lot of time studying it, right? And that will change like our strategy. We'll think through, we think through how do you tune Surge in an environment where there's more demand outside the core versus in the cores. We'll think through like what should bonuses be when you have that type of environment.
For sure. So I think Surge is a really good example of an automated one. I can kind of like pretty clearly see how that's automated. You guys have been doing it forever. And obviously, I think it's one of the products that, works really well. People obviously may complain about it, but at the end of the day, they're still taking rides, and having that reliability, at whatever cost is often worth it, right? That's why people pay it. But I'm curious, actually it's interesting. I would have kind of personally guessed that bonuses were more manual. You talked about that, the streaks and basically the weekly trip based bonuses, right? Because I mean, as a driver, we see these changing every week, right? Like it's very rare that a bonus offer from one week to the next is the same. So you kind of, it seems like to a driver that like, oh, some guy or a girl, must be behind the scenes, changing this or giving me more or lower. And it sounds like that may be partially due to computer algorithm. I guess, what are the inputs that go into that though? Because someone has to be deciding that, or it has to be looking at some inputs, right?
Yeah, so it's a lot more automated than you think. Because we just wouldn't have the people on the team to manually review and set it. So there's a lot of checking in the back end. I mean, the inputs for us is we're constantly looking at where do we think we're going to have more drivers or less drivers and more rider sessions and less rider sessions. And based on, either past experience, we've been in this business a while now, like we have lots of data based on past experience. We sort of know where those demand patterns happen, or you have a New Year's Eve recently where you sort of see it in the future. We have some pretty good algorithms and tools now that set the offers. What do we think is going to be enticing for drivers? What are people going to respond to? What do we think the efficiency of those offers are going to be for us in terms of getting drivers and riders to convert? And then my team does do a cursory check on, are the offers coming out right? Are they in the right places in the major geographies? But we've gone are the days. When I joined in 2016, there was a lot of them were being set manually. There was someone sitting there crafting them each week. But we really automated all that in the last few years.
Yeah. I mean, the historical data makes a lot of sense too, right? Obviously, Uber is, I think I saw a tweet that I want to say it's like 12 or 13 years old, right? Since the first screenshot that I've seen posted. So it's
Yeah,
been
really.
around for a while, a lot of data racked up. So I'm assuming there's a lot of historical, New Year's Eve data, January to April, which I think sometimes is referred to as the winter slowdown, right? And then, but what about more dynamic events like maybe like Super Bowl is coming up here? I guess that's sort of historical, but also kind of a one-off thing in Los Angeles. Super Bowl is coming up. Weather, I know, plays a big impact. How are those taken into account?
Yeah, when you get something like the Super Bowl, there's a mix of automated and manual, right? Like the team will think about that more specifically, because there's, our business is, I think, really neat in that we have this intersection of like, well, there's real constraints. Like there's only so many cars you can get into the Super Bowl parking lots and where they need to go and things like that. So my team will spend a lot of time thinking through, okay, what's the right incentive structure on those? But it does still get automated by the tool. We're not like manually processing that. So that makes sense. Weather, I've tried to predict weather. We're not good.
Well, no one can predict weather. It's literally, I looked out my
like,
window right now and it was just sprinkling. So that's sort of
exactly.
weird. But.
So weather, we're much more, unless there's like a major event, hurricanes, things like that, where you're actually responding to an emergency, you're shutting down a market. We are, and you're preparing for those things, make sure people are safe. It's really hard for us to respond to like you said, like meteorologists can barely forecast weather. I stopped trying to forecast weather a long time ago. So we kind of set a strategy, and for us, we sort of set it for, we set what we think the world, the marketplace is going to look like. And we look out 3, 4, 5, 6, at least weeks in a row, ahead. For many reasons. One is like, we don't want to thrash, think about it, we don't want to thrash offers a lot, right? There's value for us, and we think about that a lot around, the consistency of the offers we put out. People are relying on these offers and making plans around what they're going to earn in a given week. So we think about that, and so you kind of take that into account. And then like the marketplace, for the most part, kind of looks similar in different phases, right? Like to your point, like January is historically a little bit slower than December, right? So you kind of know that and you plan accordingly. We don't want to, we're not sitting there like day to day thinking about how do we want to change offers.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one more point before we move on. I mean, one thing that sort of always struck me from having so much experience on the driver side is I feel like, outside of the driver experience, like I feel like driver pay bonuses, like weekly incentives, whether it's quests or trip-based bonuses like streaks, whatever it might be. It seems like it's a pretty integral part of, a driver's pay, especially in, the bigger markets, the LA, New York City, Chicago. And it feels like to me, like people outside of the driver world are always kind of like shocked, like, wow, the driver's pay was like 30% bonus pay this week. And I'm like, it's kind of always like that. I mean, how integral is that bonus pay? Like, I kind of imagine like, you can't turn it off completely one day, right? Because if a driver makes 30% less one week, it's probably not great on the marketplace. But I mean, what are your thoughts in general on, that component of the pay and like just how integral it is?
Yeah, I mean, we realize it's integral, and in major markets, drivers rely on it, and it's part of the package of like why you drive on Uber, right? You get these, well, I think even strong base earnings, plus you get these bonuses, and so we do view it as integral into the package, though it does provide some flex, right? In terms of us, manage the marketplace. So, I think it's both. I mean, we definitely, and we put a lot of investment in like, how do you make it work for drivers, like offers that are attractive and they want to go after. How do you make it then work for the marketplace? Like drivers are showing up in the right places at the right times. And then how do you make it for Uber, right? And what we can afford to do.
Yeah, makes sense. So I think really like one of the impetuses for me having you on, I was really curious. This was a couple months ago now, but Dara was giving an interview on CNBC and talking about how a lot of the recovery was, the numbers were basically recovering nicely. And I think he said that Uber had an average 5-minute ETA, and highlighted New York City and Miami as two of the best, or I guess like most quickly recovered markets. And sort of why it stuck out to me was kind of jive with my own personal experience here in Los Angeles. And I was like thinking to myself, like, man, I haven't got a 5-minute ETA as a passenger on Uber in, like a very long time. And I've called a number of rides. And so it sort of just got me thinking, it's like, okay, so what is going on, there, that it's like, all right, average 5-minute ETA, but in certain regions, like Los Angeles, I'm guessing, or it sounds like, certain regions are not recovering as quickly as others. I mean, I don't know if you have updated data since then, but what's sort of look like and what's going on there? What would you say to someone like me?
Yeah, so the good news for riders, the averages have continued to improve, even since when Dara put the stat out. So that's good for us. Like, we feel like the customer experience has been improving. Last year we got a lot of articles about how how high ETAs were high and prices were high, and so you saw us making a big investment in drivers, right?
Yeah,
I think a lot of your
what's the ideal ETA for you guys? Is it like 2 to 5 minutes or?
In downtown core, it's we want an ETA that's 5 minutes or less.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
It's harder to do as you get into different geographies, but downtown core areas 5 minutes or less. But you mentioned it earlier, like in a place like Manhattan and New York, like the expectation is the ETA is 2 or 3 minutes,
right?
Just given what like New York is, and then LA is a personal challenge of mine, so I understand your pain.
This is what I hear.
LA is an area we actually have spent a lot of time focusing on. When I came into this job, one of the comments I got from the team was like, LA is really tough. It's one of these markets where you just have like, LA is not really a city. It's a county. There's multiple cities in it, right? And people move between it. You go to Santa Monica, Hollywood to Beverly Hills, and so that creates some like physical complexity. And I told him, like,
when you say physical, do you mean because it's such a big place, or because people are traveling? What's because it's a big place?
It's a big place with a lot of like multiple downtown areas.
Okay, got it.
Right.
It's not like everyone going from point A to point B. It's like A to B, B to C, C to D, E to A, right? Like, is that sort of what you mean?
Exactly. And a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
Right? LA is a lot of traffic. But like most cities, you have sort of a downtown, and then, it goes out from there. In LA, you have multiple key downtowns, and it just makes it more complex. That being said, I kind of went to the team like, that's not acceptable. Like, our job is to make Uber work for our drivers and our riders, in all markets. And so we've been spending a lot of time on it. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the driver marketing we've been doing in LA, even LAX. We got a lot of heat with LAX experience. LAX is a tough place.
Well, I mean, airports and like high density pickup spots have always been like a pretty big challenge, right? So I imagine it's kind of only magnified at this point.
Yeah. But LAX is unique in how how we've set up the lot to be one big exit lot. So we've been focused on it. We've a couple of things. One of the things we need to do in LA, we want to get more drivers, right? And so we've been focused on that, which is important for us. And then in LAX, for example, we changed the fares a little bit to help attract drivers to LA. And the good news is, based on our internal data, just the completion of trips coming out of LAX has improved substantially in the last 9 months. And we've seen, even though ETAs in LA are not the average of 5 minutes, they've improved similarly with the national average.
Got it. So, I mean, not to simplify it, but, fixing or, improving the ETAs in LA, is it just a matter of getting more drivers on the road?
It's getting more drivers on the road for sure is one of the key things. And then I think using some of our products, right? Like pushing riders who might be in Malibu to use Reserve versus trying to do an on demand. So you can match like LA is just unique in that, you know, you just have someone way up in the hills or in Malibu and it's hard to get an on demand ride. But if you scheduled it or reserved it 30 minutes or more in advance, you'd have a much higher rate of success.
Yeah. I mean, how is the Uber Reserve? You mentioned a few times. I mean, because I think this has always been one of the criticisms of Uber is that, you know, like the old scheduled ride feature wasn't really a scheduled ride, right? It basically initiated a match at a given time when you needed a ride with no guarantee of pricing or even really availability, right? If you booked on like a really busy time and you couldn't get a ride, you're sort of on your own. And I know Reserve now, when it was launched, it was sort of launched like in an actual scheduled fashion in some markets, and in other markets, it was still like the old method. What's the Reserve product look like today?
Yeah, when we say Uber Reserve, this is the new product we've come out. It's rolled out to most cities now. It's rolled out to some airport pickups, and this is like what we think is a true Reserve experience, where we are actually going out up to I think up to 7 days in advance. Sending out to drivers to actually reserve the trip. And you'll get a confirmation back, like this driver has been, you know, assigned, they've accepted your trip. And that to us, me is the real Reserve experience. You know, the old schedule ride product was nice. It helped drive, you know, riders request in advance, but it didn't have this on-time guarantee. It didn't have the feature of a driver actually accepting it, you know, hours or days in advance.
Right. Yeah. Because I think that, you know, like one of that use case, I think is really interesting because for a lot of drivers, you know, airport rides, for example, you know, probably, you know, a lot of scheduled rides happen obviously to the airport. You know, it's like typically they can be very lucrative, right? Especially if they're early morning before traffic or longer distances. And so I'm curious what you found with the Uber Reserve product when it comes to drivers is sort of, are they just getting base rates? And is that kind of enough if it's longer rides or less traffic, or is there some extra incentive, right? Because you really kind of are, you know, like you can't not fulfill, right? If someone is like booking a ride with Uber Reserve to the airport and a driver doesn't show up, you know, that's a big problem for that rider, right? So I imagine that you have to make some extra, you know, monetary guarantee to the rider or pay the driver more. How do you sort of, right? Like, I guess you're probably the person you can put it in better technical terms than me, right? But like the cost of not fulfilling that ride is much greater than like my normal Friday night ride to the bar, right?
Yeah, totally. This is a great question because I think we've had some confusion around like how we price Reserve for drivers. So Reserve has this guarantee to the rider, which is we guarantee the driver will show up on time, or we'll give the rider not just their money back, but also we pay them out. In order to make sure we can deliver on that premise, it's a premium price experience. So for the driver, whether it's a UberX or a black car trip, the Reserve trip is priced with a much bigger minimum fare.
Got it.
With the idea like that starts the clock, right? We want to give you a big minimum fare so you feel like it's worth your time to arrive early and wait. And then on top of that, you're earning, you know, higher time and distance for that trip. And so we've priced that to make, you know, because a lot of drivers will say like, hey, you're dispatching me early. I'm simply waiting 20, 30 minutes. And we really made sure that we price it as a premium product, even for UberX. Is that we try to make sure that there's value to the driver for doing that, and that they feel like, oh, like it's worth my time. I'm getting this, you know, this big base upfront fare, and I'm getting wait times built in, etc. So that I think it's been confusion because I've been talking to a bunch of drivers who were saying like, hey, sometimes I'm getting these Reserve trips or during peak times. It may not be worth my time or not. And so I want to keep listening because that to me is important. Like this product works as long as drivers feel like there's value for them to take it, show up ahead of time, wait a little bit longer for the rider. Because the more we can get riders feeling like they have peace of mind, the driver is going to show up for those like really early morning airport trips or late night or like, then like the whole thing works. Like we'll get a lot more demand for Reserve trips. They're price premium for drivers, so hopefully they feel like they're making good earnings on them. You know, and it's a good, you know, we get the growth moving.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important concept because it seems like over the years, there's always been this kind of feeling with drivers, right? That, hey, if I have to do extra work, I should be paid for it. And they weren't,
Yeah.
but it does seem like over time it's taken, maybe not as, it hasn't happened as quickly as drivers would like, but it does seem like Uber is recognizing that, I mean, like drivers have never been the biggest fans of Uber Pool because it was like, the pickup and drop off is the most challenging part. Now you got to do two. And you actually, the per mile and per minute rate was less, right? Or used to be less on Uber Pool. Like you didn't get paid for waiting time before. You didn't get paid for, the longer distance, I guess, pickup, the longer ETAs. Right now, you get paid after a certain threshold. And a lot of these elements, it's sort of funny. I just wanted to ask you is that, a lot of these elements that I think have been added over time kind of remind me of more traditional transportation for hire, even taxis or, for hire private car services, right? Like they have, hire, if you need a scheduled ride, for example, to the airport, it's like, now that driver has to stop working an hour before, or they have to, accommodate their schedule, right? So they got to charge more. I'm just curious, kind of like what your thoughts on, like obviously there are a lot of nice benefits to the technology and on demand and paying with credit card, but it seems like some of these, it's like, not just like getting into a taxi, but like some of these elements are like pretty similar, right? I mean, pickups at airports, right? Doing the pickup line, that Uber has been testing in some places, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I still fundamentally believe we're providing a better experience.
Yeah.
We're providing good experience for all the reasons, technology, safety, both on the rider and driver side. But what I'd say is the thing I've been with Uber now a while. I've seen us go through ups and downs, internally, externally with drivers, and the lesson I have that I always say is like, for drivers, I hope you agree, it's like substance rules a day, right? Like drivers are out there, they're trying to they want to see good earnings, with the flexibility that Uber wants to offer and the app working for them all the time. And like Uber Pool is a good example, right? We're just dipping our toe in the water and piloting now what we call UberX Share. And the first thing we said was like, how are we going to make this attractive, not just to riders, right? Our riders want cheap fare, but also the drivers. And we launched it in Miami with a driver opt-out.
Yeah,
right?
I saw that.
And the idea there was saying like, well, we would prefer drivers to try it. So I'd ask all your listeners to try it, right? Because we think it's a little bit different. You're earning UberX time and distance, UberX fare. And hopefully you're getting more utilization because more riders, and there's more trips. But if you don't want to do it, there's an opt-out. And like that to me is like a right balance of trying to find the balance between, hey, riders want lower fares, but we're hearing drivers. Some drivers don't want to do it. Some do.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I'm glad you brought up that because I think that's a really good example. Like one of the areas I've criticized Uber in the past is that they didn't put their money where their mouth is, right? It's like, hey, Uber Pool is great, but you don't have the option to opt out, right? So now with UberX Share, I like that the fact that, it's, hey, we're creating this new product, but if you don't want to do it and you don't think it helps your earnings, right, we're going to let you opt out, right? And then if drivers, aren't earning as much, you can sort of let them know that, hey, like drivers who have opted in are earning more if that's, sort of with this in regards to this product, because, there are reasons obviously that drivers do like these shared rides, right? If they're shorter and they get you to a quest bonus, faster, right? So then you kind of understand like, all right, are they just complaining to complain or, is this actually a problem, right? Like an actual problem with the product and the earnings don't make up for it. So I think that's pretty cool. And then I saw this blog post that I think was interesting. It was a year in review, listening and fixing. And I think your team may have worked on a number of these products around saying thanks and, kind of employees like Dara out there delivering for Uber Eats. And one of the things that I saw was kind of interesting is that there were over 300 fixes that were basically made to meaningfully improve the driver and courier experience. So I'm just curious, sort of looking back on, 2021, I got to get my years straight. What was, one or two things that you were really, I guess, most proud of or most passionate about that you sort of did? And, maybe you felt either you want to, kind of talk about more, or maybe you felt that they didn't get the, credit that they deserved.
Yeah. So the first one to me is the fact that we got more Uber employees driving or delivering on the platform, right? I think that will pay dividends for all our earners, all drivers and delivery people for years. Starting with Dara, right? Like you get the CEO taking notes of like, here's the things he liked, didn't like, and he sends that back to our product teams and our ops teams to go fix, like those things get fixed. Now, it shouldn't just be Dara.
Is there, and remind me, is there a policy, or is it just sort of recommended or encouraged, or what's the sort of impetus?
There's not a like a fixed policy. What we are running is periodic weeks where we encourage and provide employees opportunities to do a bunch of things, either go out and drive or deliver. We do customer support listening. So for example, myself and my team, we've done a lot of shadowing of green light hub visits, people coming into the in-person centers, looking at support tickets. And then more recently, I got out and drove a bit for the first time in a while. I've driven before, but for the first time in a while, I went through the Hertz Tesla flow, and I got myself into a Model 3, sort of do both, get driving and try out the Tesla and the Hertz partnership. So that's one, I think. And there's 300 fixes. They're simple. Sometimes they're simple things like, I got an email and it's dated. I don't understand what it means. On my team, we found that like some of the emails drivers were getting when they were signing up were referencing the fact that the green light hubs were closed, but they were reopened for COVID, right? Like just things that confuse people. Like we should be straight. We try to make it easy. And then so I'm proud. Like there's a lot of little things. They all add up of like making it easy to get onboarded, making it easy to get re-onboarded is one. And then a couple other things I think that that I'm proud of last year. One was the launching Uber Crew. I'm sure you saw this, which is really engaging with drivers more in a more like regular way, not just like one-off. Hey, Uber is looking for having a conversation, but like this is a big program that we're investing in with people across the U.S. And that led to getting feedback on the pause button and the gas discounts, and something as simple as pause. And funny enough, like, so I was out there driving for the first time in a while, and I'm like, I'm getting tons of pings, and I'm like, one of the things that I just
hard to stop sometimes.
It's hard to stop, and I couldn't find the pause button fast enough to like stop the pings coming. But like I appreciate it. Like when I finally got paused, like take a break.
So you could pause a quest or a streak or something, or I guess more of a streak, right? Or something like that, and not lose whatever you were on, right? To go to the bathroom or whatever it might be. Yeah, no, I think
I have new appreciation for that, which is, trying to, especially in California, it's like trying to make sure I kept my acceptance rate up so I could see all the information, plus keep my streak going. And also take a break every once in a while.
No, I mean, definitely. I think, as you might imagine, I'm a big fan of, anyone kind of getting out there and having some firsthand experience, because you definitely learn a lot that way. And I mean, I guess even Uber Crew, though, one thing, I mean, Uber has had many very, one of the criticisms I heard from drivers about Uber Crew, it's like, Uber has kind of tried this before, right? Like, I mean, they've had, I can't remember what I think they've honestly had like 2 or 3 iterations in the past. There was like a driver board or, sort of like a driver, I can't remember what it was called, like a driver resolution, some sort of group like that. And I wonder if it's, more just because I've been doing it for a while that I'm like, I kind of almost don't lend as much credit, to these new services. But, if there's a bunch of new drivers and it's the first time they're seeing it, do you feel like there's any, sort of like, oh, we messed this up in the past, so now, we still have the opportunity to fix it? Or is it like, we got to do an even better job with this next one? Because I feel like sometimes with these products, it's like first version of Uber Pool, I wasn't a fan of. So I'm not going to, like give Uber a lot of credit when this next one comes out.
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll relook at them.
Well, I do, but I mean, I'm also, I mean, like the typical driver is sort of, like, I think they're kind of like out, probably rightfully so, like out for themselves, thinking about like, hey, I got to make money. I got to do this. I got to do that. Right.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, we, back to my point on substance, like when we're launching Uber Crew, the conversations we had was, if we're going to do this, we got to make sure that drivers feel like they have a voice and that we're taking their input. Like, don't put all this time and effort into it and not make sure we're using the information appropriately. So like we had that conversation and we launched it because we're like, no, like we need this insight. Like it's valuable to us and valuable to drivers to make sure they have that avenue. And so we won't get it perfect every time. Like we're trying to balance a bunch of constituents in the marketplace between drivers and riders and regulators, and so we're trying, but I think hopefully what you're seeing is a more concerted long-term effort to make sure drivers have an avenue to be heard. We're fixing some of the things that are like pretty obvious if you're a driver, and some of the stuff will take us longer, right? Like is around improving the app and adding things. So
what's the biggest opportunity for you in your mind to sort of fix, improve in 2022 going forward? Is there one big thing or one big area you think would have like the biggest impact on drivers?
I don't see like one big thing. I think that's honestly, I think that's like where sometimes we got ourselves previously wrong, which was like, oh, we think you fix this one thing for drivers and they'll be happier. No, like we have teams that are focused on each area of the driver experience, from onboarding to the bonuses, to the app experience, to adding to making like working across rides and food delivery and other opportunities work. And each of those teams, we're a big company, each of those teams have good resources, and they all have really interesting roadmaps. Like all of them have things they're going to work on. And so for me, like I'm really excited about like seeing them all come together versus just like one big thing.
Well, I definitely imagine it wouldn't be, like one product or one feature, but I mean, I guess like, sometimes people ask me like what I think was be, like the thing that I would want to see would be like driver loyalty, basically the understanding, someone who's done tens of thousands of trips or has a higher rating, they would be rewarded financially or get, priority customer support when they walk into a green light center. I mean, it's like the, not rocket science, right? When you go to United in your first class, you have a special line, right? Because you're more valuable or you've done more trips or you've spent more money. And so I think that's something like I don't actually know like how much of an impact that would make on Uber's side, but I do think stuff like that, like I feel like if I was nailing down one thing, I mean obviously drivers always want to be paid more, but sort of other than that, I think like sometimes loyalty to me seems like a big area too.
I'll tell you that's on the list. I think Uber Pro is how we think about Uber Pro, and how we make sure you feel like when you hit that, when you're 10,000 trips in versus you're a new driver, like the person who's got 10,000 trips feels like Uber rewards and recognizes those 10,000 trips. I think without being able to feel like really talk through like the exact roadmaps, because we're still working on these things, but like I do think like something like that needs to be built into it. And I recognize that today, I think a fair criticism is like, when you hit that 10,000 trip mark, all of a sudden you roll a 10,001 and nothing happens. You're like, we could do more there for sure.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, Dennis, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, talking about some of these different regions, the recovery, and also what your team is up to at Uber. If folks want to follow your team's work, I mean, or get help from Uber, where are you sending people these days? Where can they learn about everything that's going on at Uber?
Yeah, I mean, subscribe to our social channels. We post blog posts and I think, and then in-app is probably the best way, the driver inbox.
I was going to say, they probably don't really need to do much. You're going to find them and send them the info that they need, right?
I appreciate you having me. Hopefully we can do this again. It's good to meet you.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. Take care.